I'm super grateful to have you.
Of
I guess the
course.
first thing that I was noticing is that you worked at Sirius for a little while,
I did.
Mad Dog Radio, right?
Yes, I was the original host of the morning show.
Yeah, 6 to 10. So funny enough, I have some ties to WFA, and I worked there personally. And then my uncle was the general manager of WFAN for, I don't know, the better part of 10 years plus. Um,
What's his name?
Lee Davis.
Okay.
So him and Chris are very close, and kind of a
Wow.
friend of the family. I actually saw him. Chris was at the club I belonged to last summer in Montclair, New Jersey. So we were
Yeah.
catching there. But yeah, what a character! What an amazing guy!
Uh, Chris is going to be on my show tomorrow morning.
Oh wow, amazing! I
Yeah.
don't think he'd know me. Maybe you could say Lee Davis's nephew, and maybe that would ring a bell
Yeah.
from.
Yeah.
But I mean, now he's doing the first take or not first take.
Oh, it's unbelievable.
Yeah, I think he's a
It's
great fit
unbelievable,
there.
guys. Yeah. I mean, he's got. It's very interesting. When I started, and I grew up in Ridgewood, New Jersey, and
Oh,
so listening to FAN and then obviously listen to Mike and Chris
mm,
um, and then, all these years later to interview with him as he's starting, Mad Dog Radio on Sirius XM. Um, and then, moving back up there and being there for 2 years, he was, he's such an original. But my point about that time period was, he left a place where he was such an icon and he's going to Sirius at a time when they were merging with XM.
mhm,
There was real, it actually, there was a period, it was like 48 hours of Chapter 11.
mm.
And that was my first week on the job. Now, I knew that there was volatility with relationship to, the merger, but I watched him really kind of struggle a little bit with the fact that on a national scale, some people knew him,
Mm.
but it wasn't like
Yeah.
FAN where him and Mike would walk in there. They'd have loaded phone lines, and for 5 hours they could talk about anything. They could talk about one inning in a Yankee
Oh
game,
yeah.
and he was like, "Nobody's calling. Like, what am I doing
Yeah.
here?" And now here we are,
Yeah.
17, 18 years later, or no, 16 years later. He's got 2 TV shows.
Yeah.
They keep giving him new contracts.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah,
amazing.
the new one with the Stephen A. Smith, he's a great fit for, and
I agree.
people are really liking him, I think, and he's, uh, you know, his character and his personality is shining through, and it's all led to this amazing moment. But I'm a big baseball guy, so like MLB Network, I know he did the Hot Stove or whatever,
High
High
heat.
Heat, right? And
Yep.
um, so that's awesome. But yeah, like I can imagine that transition of being, the big fish in a small pond, or not so much of a small pond, New York, right? The biggest market, but going to a national stage and maybe not people knowing, and then the volatility with Sirius, it's a challenge for sure. But he built
It,
it;
it
it was
was.
great. It
It
went.
was. Look, it's whether it's I think everybody kind of keeps score,
Mm,
and I think Mike and Chris. I know they're in a much better place now than they were when
yeah,
they split up. But for Chris to not only kind of outlast him but to be going through this enormous period of popularity in his mid 60s. It tickles the hell out of me.
it's
Um,
amazing. I love
yeah,
it. I love it. He's a legend. He's a legend.
totally.
And it's cool. I didn't know the Ridgewood stuff. I definitely want to get into your earlier days
Yeah.
and where you grew up and all that. But, I kind of wanted to take you back to late 2023 and selfishly tell you about the budding of SOBA. And it'll lead me into one of the topics that I think is really interesting and somewhat heavy too. So,
Whatever you want to do, I'm all
thank
yours.
you. So we're getting started here. So 2023 happens. I'm thinking about golf, I had just started playing golf in 2020. So I got sober at 22. I'll actually be celebrating 15 years on Mother's Day this Sunday.
Wow.
So I'll be. Thank
Congratulations.
you. Yeah, it's been a wild ride and a special one, and something I'm really happy about dedicating towards one day at a time. Um, so I found golf in 2020. I'm a 30 handicap. Fast forward, now I'm sitting at about a 4. So there's been a lot of great progression in a short period of time. Um, really happy about that progression. But what I found more interesting than getting better at golf were the parallels between the game of golf and the sobriety journey. And I think it's been well documented and explored the ways in which golf and life parallel one another, but it hasn't yet been focused as much about the ways golf and sobriety parallel one another. So that's what we're doing with SOBA. So I start having this idea about SOBA in late 2023. The season starts in 2024, and the reason I bring it up is because you talked about it on an interview with Grayson Murray, and
Mhm.
it made me think about this. 2024 happens. Who wins the first tournament of the year in Kapalua? Chris Kirk, right? And what's special about him is that in 2023, he looks into the camera after winning the Honda Classic, and they're asking him about his win, and he said, "The only reason I'm standing here today is because of my sobriety." And then he wins in the Century Open, or the Century Open the
Yeah.
next week. And I'm starting to think, you know, there needs to be a group centered around sobriety golf, wellness golf, like this thing. I know it's there, blah, blah, blah. The next week, all they're talking about on TV is Grayson Murray, his story, his sobriety. He's got 8 months, all this sort of stuff. He hits that putt in the playoff versus Keegan and I'm forgetting who else. And, the rest is history, right? And so back to back weeks, and you talked about this on your conversation with Grayson,
Yeah.
back to back weeks, there's this thread of sobriety in golf. So I'm like, you know what? This is the sign that I need, and I'm going to do this. So I spent all of 2024 focused on building content to support what you now see with SOBA. So that's the long story. The short of it, and what I wanted to get into is obviously, it's May, it's Mental Health Awareness Month. Unfortunately, we did lose Grayson. His passing was May 25th of 24, and you had this really special conversation that I encourage a lot of people to listen to. I guess you've been open about your sobriety and about how important it is to you. Um, I guess I just open it up to you wherever you want to go with that. I'd love to understand, um, your thoughts on all of that.
Corey, there's so much you and I could talk about um, as it relates to whether it's why you and I are here.
Mm,
And the truth is, I don't think there's anybody, and I can only speak for myself. I know unequivocally that I would not be sitting here having this conversation with you, um, being in a place, most importantly, with my family being intact.
mm,
Um, and it is secondary, but I think the things that we do, professionally, I hope that people are stimulated by what they do. I loved what I do, and I loved what I did, and I compromise that and sacrifice that because I found myself in the throes of alcoholism and was confounded by my inability to stop drinking.
mm,
And it wasn't until I put my hand up and said, I you know what, I give up. That I understood, and it took a while for me to understand that where I might have discipline and willpower, so to
mm,
speak, um, in other areas of my life, that this is much, much, more powerful and stronger than that. And so, golf, as you said, um, and I've said this, not on countless occasions, because, they're like having this conversation. I was very much looking forward to it.
mm,
And I'm always willing to talk about it. I don't ever want to put my recovery or my sobriety in somebody's face, so to speak. Never. I would never do that. I don't want to violate anybody's sensibilities, but I'm willing to talk about it because, look, I'm lucky enough to be here. I don't know if I'd be alive if I didn't get sober. The progressive nature of my alcoholism had gotten to the point that I was experiencing, and my family was seeing behavior that was unrecognizable, that was so dangerous and so unhealthy. And I heard this. I heard this from a gentleman, in my sober network, and I've said it a few times out loud, and it's the absolute truth in my mind that alcoholism is suicide in slow motion, and that the only way that you can stop what is progressively going to be the result of being powerless over alcohol is to do just that, and that is to put your hand up and say, I can't do this anymore. There's got to be a better way. And it wasn't easy for me to do that because I couldn't envision life without it. I couldn't envision a day without it, let alone the idea of looking out on the horizon, however long my life was going to be, unattainable. But, it didn't take that long for me to realize that that's an impossible way to look at it. It's an impossible way to look at sobriety. You said it at the outset of this conversation. Today, by the grace of God, you and I have today. And I wake up every day an untreated alcoholic, and it's my responsibility to treat my disease the best I can. Some days I do it fairly well. Other days, not as well, but it's been well enough that, like you, I've stacked some 24s on top of each other. And here you and I sit here by the grace of God to have a conversation about, how humble and grateful we are that we have found a better way. And that golf, as we have this conversation and explore the redeemable aspects about golf that don't keep me sober, but I can promise you it enriches, nourishes, and fortifies my sobriety. There's no doubt it does.
Yeah. The word we've been leaning into is compliment, right? I wouldn't encourage people to, go to the golf course to get sober. There's amazing, it sounds like we're sharing a lot of the similar language of maybe where we've gotten sober too. And,
no question.
Yeah, I would just say for me personally, 12-step recovery has been a vital part of my life. And if anybody asked, how do I get sober? I would recommend those are great places to go.
I share that sentiment.
Yeah. Yeah. And, I love what you said about raising your hand, because I actually talk about that a lot too. And it's, the only reason why I'm here is because I when I think back to that moment, I want to ask for you what it was like the days leading up to that day, of actually making that decision, or the decision happened to you. I don't know which one. I'm curious. When I think back to that moment right before I went to rehab, when I close my eyes, I see two images. I don't know why. I've always seen it. I see a white flag and I see a little window open. I don't know why. I just think about that all the time. I see a white flag, the surrender, and a lot of that had to do with just being broken, spiritually bankrupt and lost. And, the short version there is, it's May of 2010. All my best friends had just spent 4 years at these amazing universities. And, they're coming home at 22 years old with all these degrees. I'm still in my parents' basement trying to figure life out, with nothing going for me, working at the local supermarket, and then that little window open of like, there's if I take the right steps and if I take the right actions, I can get better. And I was in rehab the next day and I have not drank since. And that is a reflection of sitting down, shutting up, being told what to do in the beginning days, because I didn't know what to do. And it was from the people that I could see in their eyes, knew where I was where I was too, but had sobriety, had time under their belt, and knew how to guide me. So I guess for you, I'd love to understand, leading up to that first day, what was it like for you? Did you know that was going to be the day? Like, can you tell us about that?
Yeah, Corey, I didn't know it was going to be the day. You know, like many alcoholics, rationalizing behavior, justifying behavior. Um, I was in that was a daily cyclone for me. And I thought that I was doing a pretty shrewd, effective job of kind of shielding myself from, people noticing how, kind of off kilter and disoriented I was every day. Um, but there were plenty of signs. There were signs inside my home. There were signs, uh, not that I had drank in the workplace, but just erratic behavior and irritability and discontentment, and so the signs were all around it. So, and the other part is that I knew privately, for some time. I didn't know what being an alcoholic meant, but I knew that I was displaying alcoholic behavior every day and had been for quite some time. And I was confounded by, again, like why I couldn't stop. And I would go to the bookstore and I would try to find books that did not include, the requirement of total abstinence.
Yeah.
Like, give me some ways that I can figure out a way to make this, civilized again and be a social drinker. And how can I go back to a baseline where it's not the way it is now, which every day was an exhausting exercise of deceit and dishonesty, coupled with, just this healthy dose of, at whatever point during the day when it was acceptable to me that I could, get through whatever it is that I was responsible for, and then be compromised and impaired, and still somewhat responsible for other things like being a dad and being there for my children. I might have physically been there, but I wasn't present. I wasn't engaged. I was completely distracted. And so when that day came, I knew I absolutely was not going to have a challenge to raise my hand and to say that I was an alcoholic, but I didn't know what that meant in terms of, okay, now what? I didn't know what that was going to be, that what it was going to ask of me. I'll be honest, and I've said this, plenty of times around people in recovery, is I don't know that I was necessarily ready to stop drinking, even though it had stopped working for me altogether. Literally for several years at that point, I wanted people to stop watching me drink. And even though I wasn't drinking publicly, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Being observant, looking at me, watching me. What's wrong with him? Why is he not behaving every day like a drunk? Because again, I pursued isolation with such vigor and such determination, that I didn't do any social drinking. Those days had ended.
Yeah.
It was when the family is in bed, can I do the necessarily amount of drinking to make me be as numb and as pain free as I felt that I needed to be, could be. So when my hand was raised, there was no reluctance to admit I was an alcoholic, but I had no idea what the road ahead was going to require of me to be an alcoholic in recovery, and not just merely being able to say comfortably that I'm an alcoholic.
Yeah, and I've seen you talk about this too, and you're leaning into it right now. And something maybe we can explore is, the disease of alcoholism. And I don't claim to be, a doctor of any sort or a clinician, but I have a lot of experience with it, on both sides, both being one and then kind of being, an alcoholic in recovery, and you know one of the things that makes me think of when you're telling this story is that it wasn't a moral dilemma. Like this wasn't us being like we were sick people. This wasn't us being challenged morally. Like there's a difference, and I think people, whether you're on the outside looking in and you're seeing a family member or friend kind of affected by this experience, they're not necessarily doing it on purpose, right? You're dealing with, like you said, a disease, a sick person, um, you know, akin to a diabetic who won't stop eating sugar kind of thing, right? And can't, or, there's literature that talks about this jaywalker who has this affinity for walking across the street, even though he keeps getting hit by a car. Like that's kind of the analogy that we're dealing with. It's like there's so much evidence piling up to tell us it's probably best to stop drinking or using drugs. Like there was so much evidence for me, and it sounds like for you that like, hey,
Me
this
too.
is probably not a good idea anymore. But that knowledge wasn't enough for me, and it sounds like for you. And then so the question is like how do we change? How do we get better? And I think what we're also talking about is the difference between like maybe some heavy drinkers out there that want to stop versus for me, like if I ever were to drink again, and the reason why I've dedicated myself, and whether this is true or not for me, I believe it to be true. I've believed since very early on in my recovery, if I ever drank again or used, people would never see me again. Like, why would I ever want to get sober again? Like I don't know. It's kind of a wild experience, and that's not a normal relationship to drinking or drugs, right? So um I just think that's an important distinction for people. And with soba, I just want broadly people to know is that with what we're building, there's different sort of spectrums of what your relationship can be to drinking. You can be all the way towards alcoholism, drug addiction, that spectrum, or you can be a wellness focused person who says, this isn't serving me anymore and I'm going to cut it out. But I think one of the things that, again, we're making a distinction is like we're of a different cloth here, and drinking is a very serious situation for us
It's
to
life
avoid.
or
Yeah.
death. It's not. It's yeah. And it's interesting to and one of the things that helped me immediately in terms of believing that there might be a path ahead for me. But again, it took a while. I was not like you. I did not walk into whether it was a treatment facility and come out and never drink
Mm,
again. I relapsed a couple of
mm,
times. I've been to two different treatment facilities. Um, but the reason why you know I did relapse is it was like clockwork. I stopped doing the things that as I said earlier, I wake up untreated
mhm,
as an alcoholic, and it's my responsibility to treat it.
mm,
And I allowed myself to either feel like I had a baseline of, it's almost like, uh, it's a societal thing to a degree. It's like, okay, I've got a baseline of knowledge of this, but no, this is a requirement of really, this is what the lifestyle has got to
mm,
be, and that there has got to be a continuing kind of sharpening of your instrument. And your instrument is your, kind of your heart, and your mind, and your soul.
mhm,
That in order for me to feel this way each day, it requires certain things. And what I heard early on is one of the interesting things that I experience on occasion now is that I thought I was terminally unique. Like there's no way that I am going to meet somebody that is going to start to tell me about their own behavior that is going to be even remotely similar to my own. Really?
mhm,
Actually, it took like 7 minutes in the first meeting I ever went to.
mm,
Um, and it kind of made me lean forward and that has never subsided. The people that I have in my life, in my sober network, the things that we shared, whether it was behavioral things, whether it's the way we thought, obviously the way that we acted. I'm not terminally unique. There's plenty of people like you and I that thought and acted in exactly the same way. And that comforted me for several reasons, because it's like, okay, I'm not a unicorn. So, okay, maybe there is a road ahead, but also there's great inspiration. And I've always find inspiration by listening to other people share their own vulnerabilities. I think sharing vulnerability is one of the most courageous things that anybody can ever do in their life, whether it be to one person, to a group of people, privately, publicly, does not matter. And the last thing that I'll say about this idea of total abstinence and a life of recovery, which includes emotional sobriety, as opposed to maybe somebody who thinks that they are overindulging and there's a gluttonous relationship that they have with alcohol that may not necessarily be alcoholism. When I talk to people who don't think like I do, it literally takes less than a minute for me to say something about my own thoughts and actions, the way that I used to think and act when I was drinking, that they would get a look on their face where their eyes would glaze over, and it would be something that they didn't identify with at all.
Yeah.
And I would say to myself or say to them, I'm so glad you don't identify with that.
Yeah.
I say it to my family.
Yeah.
I'm so glad that you don't think the way that I do.
And to that point, it's the opposite too. When you talk to somebody like this, when you say those things, I'm like, I know this guy. I know how he thinks. I know how he acts. And to your point about vulnerability, that's a skill that I witnessed, in those meetings and sober networks, right? And that is something that has been so valuable to me, because the only reason I'm sitting here today is because when I felt like I wanted to drink, I've raised my hand and told people, right? And that was only because I witnessed people telling me that I needed to do that in order to stay around. And there's multiple factors of why people don't and do stay around. And I wanted to talk to that with you also about, sobriety isn't necessarily a linear experience some of the times, right? Like, the first day you're thinking about wanting to get sober usually isn't. And that wasn't for me either. I had spent years, Googling my relationship around smoking weed or doing drugs and trying to manage it in different ways, only drinking beer, only drinking vodka, whatever it was. Right. So yeah. And I would just say, it's not that linear experience. And, so just being conscious of that. And one of the things that I've heard as well is that if you don't think you are this type, you go experiment, see what you can do and see what you can't. I'm of the type that once I start, I can't stop. And there's this obsessional nature that happens with me that doesn't with I think other people. The other thing I wanted to talk about is, you mentioned earlier about not being necessarily public about it, but you do, you don't want to, I'm putting words in your mouth, be annoying about it, but when it's prompted and it feels natural and it can help people, you will. And I just wanted to talk to that because, I haven't been public about my sobriety until January 1st of this year when I launched Soba, and I never wore it on my sleeve. If people wanted to learn more, I'd always be open to it. But, it's a very fine line of being kind of annoying sobriety person and rah-rah about this sort of lifestyle versus just trying to let people know that, like what you're saying, and I think what we're trying to do with Soba is like, there are cool people out there that are living this lifestyle. And I think that there's this movement that I'm observing that there are people recovering out loud a little bit more. And I'm hopeful that will help people sort of get the support that they need, and ask for the help that they want.
I I don't necessarily do this, every time, but I do, try to consciously ask myself if I'm going to make the choice to talk about it. And when I do, there's no reluctance
Mm.
at all. And I'll be honest with you, and I think you feel the same way. It's not about people. It's not my pursuit of people, you know, having compassion for
Mm.
me. Um, it's there's likely somebody in most everybody's life that is either going through something, or you could maybe get 1 degree, not likely 2 degrees from everybody that everybody knows that is probably not in some state of vulnerability.
Mm.
It could be depression, it could be addiction, it could be alcoholism, um,
Mm.
it could be any number of things. And so, um, I never felt a great deal of shame.
Mm.
I felt a great degree of guilt.
Mm.
And a lot of that was rooted in years of dishonesty, because my wife said something to me, not once, she would say it periodically to me, because, I was always trying to cover my ass with respect to, my behavior. And you said that you were not going to do this, that, or the other as it pertained to, almost everything. But the root cause of all of this was my alcoholism and my drinking. And again, it's not to absolve the behavior.
Mm.
It's trying to give people an understanding of, you know, explaining why the behavior was so
Mhm.
unrecognizable. But my wife said to me, she said, God, you make lying so easy.
Mhm.
Now, that is not the easiest statement to volley back across the net to a spouse. Um, so what it usually was met with was kind of like a shrug, a very, just kind of uncomfortable, kind of, I didn't say
Mm.
much because I didn't have an answer.
Mm.
Um, and so when I finally did, raise my hand, get the help that I needed, when it was a reasonable amount of time for me to address a number of things with the people in my life that I had hurt. And it wasn't so much about hurting anybody physically, although I sure as hell could have,
Mm.
because I put myself in harm's length, in harm's way, and others as well. That I told her, all those times you said to me that I appeared to lie with ease. It wasn't with
Mm.
ease. It was exhausting
Mm.
to do it every day, because it was a web of lies. And how can I figure out a way to pass out in the bed every night without, the house of cards crumbling down around me? And then you think, if you're hearing this and you don't think like I do, you're thinking, well, Jesus, then just don't do it
Yeah.
again. That ain't the way it
Yeah.
works. You wake up the next day, and even though you're riddled with guilt and you feel like crap, um, you know, your soul is hollowed out. Physically, you're shot. Uh, you're not really sleeping well. It's just from exhaustion and alcohol. And you wake up and somehow you convince yourself that not only am I going to do this again today, I'm going to do it to the best of my ability, and not get caught. And that was every
Mm.
day. It was every day.
Yeah. Yeah. And to your point, it's not something you necessarily wanted to do or be, and I can relate to that. I didn't want to be of this type. I didn't know that, I got sober at 22. So my goals were a little different at that time. I didn't have a spouse. I couldn't actually get a girlfriend at all because nobody, you should have seen the way I looked at what I looked like back then. But, you know, you know, um, the goals there were like, I wanted to get my college degree at this, community college. And every year I'm trying to set goals of like, just go to class and do the assignments. And, when I had the choice to make of like going to class or going to drink or going to class or going to smoke some weed or do drugs, I lost that battle every time. And it wasn't because, it wasn't a moral dilemma, like I didn't have a choice, right? And that disease is cunning and baffling, as they say, right? So, yeah, I'm totally tracking you and how you are, how you think, and I think that there are a lot of people who would identify as well. So I guess you know, I'd love to understand a little bit more about your golf experience. So you grew up in Ridgewood, not too far from where I am right now. I grew up on Long Island, actually. So it's new telling people I live in Jersey. It's a little tough, but forgive me.
You'll get over it.
Yeah, it's beautiful. We love it here. We love it here.
I had a great childhood. I loved Ridgewood. I still do. Some of my dearest friends in the world. My high school reunion, I'll be going to it in the fall. Those people, my childhood was great for a lot of reasons. I grew up in a great little town. I had great friends who are friends of mine to this day. And I lived in a house of harmony. I mean, I had amazing parents, and I still have my mom. She's 85. My dad passed in 2011. I have two older sisters who live in the state of North Carolina, where I am now. My childhood was great memories. I just, so fortunate, so lucky to grow up, where I did. And, again, we all get to wherever we get to where, hopefully more of us do have the chance to raise our hand and say, I can't do this anymore. But there are many who don't and don't live to realize that there's a better way. There's a softer way. There's a healthier way. There's a way that, as I say, again, a lot of this stuff, it's not like I'm preaching this stuff every day, but the things that stand out to me about the way life feels today, because of all of the deception and the way that I had to live in the shadows every day, to kind of make it to the end of the day, it was so turbulent. It was so emotionally tumultuous that now little things feel really big. Like waking up in the morning, it doesn't matter what day it is. I mean, every day was a day of feeling awful. So it doesn't matter what the day is, but just, let's say it's a Saturday morning and waking up and walking the dogs with my wife. The level of peace that is associated with that exercise. Are you kidding? Every day I woke up and there was so much tension in the house because I had created all of it. Every single day. It was just to what varying degree it was. Was it DEFCON 1 or, DEFCON 5? I mean, it was one or the other, or it was in the middle. The peace of knowing that, you know what? I'm not guilty of anything today. Now, have I done everything perfectly? Hell no, it's not that. And that is like, God, I'm telling you, Corey, I think about like when I used to, it would be like, can you go to the market and pick up X, Y, and Z? Sure. And then when I get home and it's like, why did they take 45 minutes? Well, if you want to know the truth, it does take about, 8 to 12 more minutes to swing by the liquor store. And then it takes me another, 10 to 15 minutes to swig that pint of vodka while I'm driving around the block 4 times before I get home from picking up the 3 items at the Harris Teeter. And so, but in the absence of that, like the little things feel big
Yeah.
because what they're associated with is this peace of
Mm.
mind, which has a value that will never be measured.
Mm.
It can't be.
Yeah. I can relate to that, and I can definitely relate to not being a saint. Just because I've stopped drinking, and using drugs, I could still be kind of a shithead, but
Yes,
but I think what,
and irresponsible
yeah,
and all those
but
things.
I think what I think we can agree on is it's allowed us to be in the game, or for references aligned with this, on the course. It gives us a chance to score at least, uh, I had no chance previously. I was so debilitated by this pull and need to have something in my system to numb myself, to avoid myself. And what you're talking about, I can relate to this uh, opportunity daily to be the best version I can. It gives me a shot, right? And these days do stack up, and I do learn more and more and more. And I definitely encourage people who are struggling to reach out and I guess
And that's
that.
not easy to do, as you know. It's not an easy thing to do because one, I can only speak for myself. And you said it earlier, and it's so important. Like, I don't have
Mm.
answers. What I have is a story, and it's mine.
Mm.
And what has been so true of my how constructive and therapeutic it is to listen to others who have similar stories because of very recognizable behavior.
Mhm.
Um, their stories, they're not talking to me in a professorial way. They're not talking down to me. They're certainly not talking to me with any judgment at all. By simply sharing things that are relatable to me and looking at them and realizing and seeing how they found a better
Mm.
way, that's where the inspiration comes. It's not coming with some clinical textbook
Mm.
at all.
Yeah.
It's not that. And I will tell you that had it been any other way, I don't know that I would be here
Yeah.
because first of all, I sure as hell didn't want to listen to anybody. I had stopped listening to everybody because any conversation that didn't have anything to do with what was the only thing that mattered to me was making sure I had enough vodka in the house or in the trunk of my car or in my golf bag. None of it mattered. So I wasn't listening to you. You were merely an impediment to the only thing that did matter to me. Is when I started listening, uh, I wasn't listening to people telling me what I needed to do.
Mm.
All they were doing was sharing their own, their own
Yeah.
experiences. And yes, there are things that you're encouraged to do,
But
encouraged to do.
encourage for sure. Yeah, no
Yes.
rules. I'm not I don't like rules either. I don't like being told what to do.
No.
And it's cool. I love what you're leaning into because that's all it is. It's just an experience, strength, and hope. This is what it is. This is our story. And if you feel connected to it, there's a way of life that I've tried to live as best I can, and that's awarded me these days that have stacked up. So I'm with you there. And I do want to ask about the state of golf. So this is a little bit of a lighter topic, but
Yeah.
before we talked about that, still a little heavier. You did talk with Grayson
Yeah.
last year, and obviously, I actually just had Jay Green, his caddy, on the show,
Yep.
and that was a heavy episode and talk with him. But and I've had other conversations with people in the golf world, and the pressure, the stress is so high, and you know there I there are people who are dealing with this stuff on a daily basis. I guess between Grayson and just in general, what's your observation of the sort of the mental health and well-being of the golfers in that world?
Yeah. I think that, again, nobody knows. And this is one of the challenges of how can you help somebody if you don't know whether they need
Mm.
it? Um, but I think environmentally, the pursuit of what men and women at the highest level in golf do, um, that those environments are they lend themselves to, first of all, um, degrees of self doubt, challenges with self worth that, and this is not in judgment of people who find themselves kind of valuing themselves based on their performance, but it's true that and it's not just in golf. It happens. If whatever your vocation is, it's hard for that to not seep into you in thinking that you're diminished to some degree because you didn't perform or execute to a level that you either expect of yourself or others do. Um, and the other environmental thing that is part of this is that it's a lot of time alone. And even though golf has evolved to where we have more of these elite players that have a quote team around them, but for the most part, at least in my experience, and I've been covering, you know, the professional game for more than 15 years, and prior to that, it was covering all sports. Um, they don't put you to bed. They're with you in the work environment, but when the work day's over, here you are. You're not like a baseball player, a basketball player, or a football player. And football, it doesn't mean that they're not susceptible to mental health challenges. Of course they are. My point is, they leave on a Saturday, they go to whatever city, they stay in a team hotel, they meet, they're with each other. With the exception of the hours they're asleep, they wake up, they go to meetings, they go to a stadium, they play a ball game, they get on a charter, they go home. Mm-hmm. They're away from their home environment for like 24 hours for 8 Sundays. Yeah. They're home for the other 8. Golfers are always away. Yeah. They're always alone. Mm-hmm. They're always getting on planes alone. And whether there's private aviation, then you go, oh, come on. My point is, isolation is one of the most pervasive elements of why people find themselves in mentally unstable states of mind. And whether it be to numb yourself with whether it be alcohol or something else, or to just be in a bad space, in a bad headspace. And I think it's very healthy to be comfortable being by yourself, but it doesn't mean a life alone. Mm-hmm. But there's a lot of loneliness that is a byproduct of the pursuit, just merely by the way it is. And so, the thing about Grayson that I would say, and I met him when he was 16 years old and knew about the turbulence that existed in his life from a very young age. And it doesn't mean that I sensed anything. It didn't. Actually, on the contrary, it's not what I sensed, it's what I saw from him. I saw him 3 straight weeks in the weeks leading up to him taking his own life. And it was all by happenstance. But it was 3 weeks in a row at 3 different events. And we did what we did every time we saw each other, especially, after, he got sober, which was, grab each other, hug each other, and say what alcoholics or addicts who are trying to find a better way say to each other. How are you? Like, no shit, don't shit me. Like, really, how are you? It's not a throwaway line. It's the only line that matters. Like, seriously, how are you? And I sensed from him a timidity to him that I hadn't seen in him before, which was very tender. But it also speaks to kind of what happens to people like myself and you and many others, is that we are trying to ease pain. We're trying to numb ourselves up. And then when you don't do that, and even though you are experiencing this like spiritual rebirth and you're nourishing yourself in ways that are really, really fortifying, there's also a fragility and a timidity that comes with it, because you're not relying on that anymore. And the Grayson Murray that I knew when he was simply just getting through was irritable and truculent, and discontented, words that you and I know well. And I wasn't as overt with that type of behavior. And in the absence of that, I was very struck by the way that he was calm and softer in the way that he was. But, and I wrote about this after he was gone. It doesn't mean that everything is always going to be all right. And that's, you said the words earlier: cunning, baffling, and powerful. And the fourth word to me is patient. And the disease is patient. It's waiting for you to be vulnerable. And what do you do when you are? And do you have the toolkit to weather those vulnerable moments and days, which are inevitable for all of us? So, this is, and it's not, I don't want anyone to think that I am white knuckling it through life. I'm not. I'm not at all. But what I'm not is believing I've got it, so to speak. Because I don't. Because tomorrow's another day. And it requires of me what I said earlier, to treat my disease.
I'm totally tracking you. And I had shared this before, and I never met Grayson, but I shared at the top of the sort of show that him and Chris Kirk, kind of a part of the origin story in some ways of SOBA, because I had seen them and there was coverage around sobriety and golf, and so I felt this real sadness when I learned about his passing, and I had never really felt that sad before about someone I never met, so I'm really sorry that happened. And
Corey, it was, and it's when I learned that he took his own life, I was, incredibly sad, but simultaneously not surprised. And I'm not saying because of him, because that is the reality of the disease, that, as I said at the outset, that alcoholism is suicide in slow motion, and bouts of sobriety, periods of sobriety are what we're all seeking. It is a better way of life. And
to what you said before too, it is life and death, right? It
is
life and death, and being vigilant, like you were saying, and staying,
disease has one goal, your life. That's its only objective. And it will wait you out until the end of your days if you, again, find yourself in that vulnerable place. And it could be whether it's, and there's all different ways that it can be. And again, I just, people need to understand that, is that there's no nuance to this. It's not a maybe. It's inevitably, it will kill you. And that's the only goal of the disease.
I completely agree. And death does come in different forms too, right?
Yes.
And you don't have to die physically to be dead, and I think for me, I had many bouts with actually physical deaths, multiple car wrecks, times where my parents are like sleeping on the floor, making sure that I'm breathing, kind of stuff. But I was completely spiritually dead. Right. And, the disease is definitely, as they say, kind of doing push-ups, outside your room as you're sort of getting healing. No days off. And I love what you said though, today I don't feel like I'm white knuckling it. I don't feel attached to it, but I do feel, present, about, how, vigilant I need to stay. And yeah, so I do still feel a lot of sadness around that. And I think about, we've all had that in our lives if you stay around long enough too, in these fellowships or programs and live this lifestyle. Unfortunately, it does, take people and,
It's
so yeah.
inevitable. Corey, I mentioned I went to two different treatment facilities. The second one that I was in, there was a gentleman who I got very close to, and this was somebody who, and again, there it doesn't discriminate either.
Hmm.
Absolutely, there's nobody. Uh, there, there's nobody who has got an out card, whether it be age, whether socioeconomic, it doesn't matter. Nothing matters. But anyway, my point is, this gentleman was one of the brightest people I had ever met, and one of the great conversationalists I'd ever been around. Had such a view of the world, and he was dead 6 months after we left treatment.
Hmm.
And again, if you saw this man, spend an hour with him, you would think he was one of the most erudite people I had ever met. And again, it's like, it doesn't matter what your SAT score is, doesn't matter what your IQ is. You could have 3 advanced degrees, you could have a GED, does not matter.
And I've experienced a lot of that too. And one thing, without belaboring the point, you when I think about it, when you take the solution away, right, what are you left with, right? And I think that's something that we're sort of keying into a little bit, which is when you stop drinking and using drugs, and that is your solution, what do you do, right? How do you replace that? And for me, there's been a lot of different ways, fellowships, 12-step recovery is a cornerstone for me. The network of men that I have in my life, and this new sort of spiritual relationship with a higher power of my misunderstanding, like I think all of those things are a great recipe for me personally, but there needs to be, from my experience, for me, but also what I've observed, there has to be a replacement. And typically it does need to be based in a spiritual kind of nature. And I don't mean necessarily, capital S or capital R religious. And I think this ties into the second point I wanted to make, which was, it really has to do with connection. And in a lot of ways, the antidote to my sobriety or recovery is community, right? And connectedness. And when you said, no, really, how are you? How are you? Like, those are the conversations and the relationships that I have that I treasure the most, because those are the friends in my life who could be like, no, dude, you're off right now. What's going on? Tell me what's going on, And, you know, I encourage you to find some people that you can connect with in that way. And you talked about it early also, being vulnerable. It's incredibly admirable. And whether it's one person or multiple people, that's how I've been able to find peace in my life. So
It's such a neat thing to hear, from somebody else, because it first of all, knowing knowing the tumult that your young life was, and I got sober much later in life, but it doesn't change whether I listen to somebody who's 22 or somebody who's 72, for them to talk about having these things in their lives, that give them, whether it is spiritual growth. And I think what you said just a moment ago is so important. Um, finding faith, and I've always believed, because I can promise you, when I stood uh, outside of the second rehab facility that I went to on a very chilly fall afternoon, after being admitted. I have never felt more hopeless. And at the same time, how in the world could I be possessive of any faith at all? I feel like faith and hope they really are kindred spirits. They are in lockstep in my life. And when I started to feel one, I felt the other. And in spirituality, for me, and I think it's similar for you, you can find it in so many ways, because you are aware now in ways that you weren't formerly, because when you are constantly compromised and numbed up, you're not aware of things that matter, and you have very little value of those things. And I'll never forget, again, feeling encouraged by being touched by things that never touched me before. And whether it was taking a walk, which I started doing every day in this treatment facility, and noticing things, and that those were spiritual experiences for me.
Yeah.
And they have not quit.
Yeah.
And those are the things that, I'll be honest with you, I now love the journey to things almost as much as the destination, because I used to be running from everyone and everything, because I was seeking isolation, because it allowed me to satisfy the only thing that mattered, which was my necessity to drink and be numbed up. And now I'm in pursuit of things with purpose. And it may be people, and generally it is. And those people, to something you said earlier, is connection. It's connection. It's engagement. And along the way, on these journeys, like I notice things, and I'm touched by these things. And I'm like in late June, I'm going to be out at an event in Colorado Springs. You know what I'm going to do from there? I'm going to drive 6.5 hours to Northwest Nebraska because I want to. And along the way, I know that I'm going to experience something that never existed before, which is a quiet mind and a healthy amount of solitude. And
I'm glad you used that.
Those things are incredibly healthy.
I'm glad you used that word. That was the last thing I was going to say to sort of wrap this up, was, when you were talking about the players on tour and the loneliness, and I think something we try to talk about with Soba is the difference between loneliness and solitude, and figuring out how to find solitude and be comfortable in your own skin. That is the biggest gift that I've had in my life, is that I feel very confident and comfortable to go into any room and to look people in the eyes and ask them how they are, and I want to get to know people, and that's been such a gift. So, I would say that if you're pursuing this lifestyle, if you're interested in it, it is available to you. And I think I could speak on behalf of you that we're both available to kind of listen if anyone wants to talk. And I know we're over on time, but if you have a couple more minutes, I did want to talk. Okay. So the state of golf, of golf is a complicated situation, but the positives, cause a lot of the stuff we've been talking about a little heavier, but on a lighter note, Rory coming off that emotional win at the Masters, what a special experience, obviously winning his career Grand Slam in sort of dramatic fashion. We're 2 weeks away now from the PGA Championship at a place where Rory has won. You got so many amazing storylines. You got Rory is the monkey off his back, and is he going to just become, a savage this year and win all these tournaments? You got Scotty, who just shot career low of four rounds yesterday. He's in great form. You got a guy like Jordan Spieth, who's looking for his career Grand Slam at the PGA. You have JT, who just wins the RBC. He looks like he's in good form. So there's a lot of great stories. Bryson looks great. So heading into the major coming up, what are you most excited about?
My gosh. Well, I mean, you hit on, a handful of those great storylines. Um, I was talking about this morning on the heels of Scotty doing what he did, um, you know, producing, a scoring total, not to mention statistically as far as what he did in his ball striking and how it's one of the better ball striking weeks we've seen in the advanced metrics era. Um, I think that him answering back, and again, I'm not suggesting that CJ Cup Byron Nelson is the players. It's not. But he laid down a marker and he did it in an emphatic fashion. And the reason I say that is because last year at this time, and it didn't mean it didn't produce a major for Rory, but Scotty was at this moment having the year that Rory is currently having.
Mm-hmm.
He won 2 signature series events, the Players and the Masters. And here is Rory with the win at Pebble Signature Series event. He won the Players, he won the Masters. And so it was at this time last year that Rory won the team event with Shane Lowry right before the PGA Championship. And here is Scotty winning for the first time right before the PGA Championship. And so, getting the best players to cycle into their best form simultaneously is so rare. It's so rare. But the conditions currently exist that it's more than mildly plausible that we could get that. And I add Bryson to that as well, because here's the deal. The last 5 major championships, Scheffler, Rory, and Bryson have won 3 of them. You can add 2 seconds, a third, a fourth, a fifth, a sixth, and an eighth that those guys have produced in the last five majors played. So other than Xander Schauffele, who I think is an interesting storyline here as well, because he's the defending champion, and I think he's dangerous because not many people are talking about him. You have Bryson, Scheffler, and Rory in the form that they're in, and you can value the live win by Bryson all you want. The point is, the guy finished 5th at the Masters. He is the U.S. Open reigning champion. He finished 2nd at the PGA. He's as good as anybody right now in these majors. If those 3 guys give us a weekend where they're all right in the thick of it, I live in Charlotte. Charlotte likes the big event. Charlotte has always been incredibly supportive of the regular annual PGA Tour event. Quail Hollow will be lathered up. And I think that, it's possible, but I preface it by saying this. Tiger and Phil were the 2 best players of the last, 25 years plus. You can go all the way back. Phil won in the early 90s as an amateur, but just last 30 years, 2 best players. Combined, they won 21 majors. In those 21 majors, Tiger winning 15 and Phil winning 6. The other guy finished 2nd in one of those majors 1 time.
Wow.
It just, and I'm not, in 6 of those majors, they finished, one won it and the other one finished in the top 5. So that's pretty good. But again, the point is, it just doesn't happen that often that the best players are right there at the end at the exact same time. But I think that that's possible.
Well, and the fields are kind of stacked, and it kind of leads me into the second point, which I'm devastated that there's still a fraction between live and PGA. And, when you get to these majors and you have guys like Bryson and Brooks, who should be in the conversation because he has 5 majors. If he wins another one, he's tied with Phil, which is quietly, not talked about enough probably.
Phil and Faldo and Trevino. It's pretty good company.
I mean, he's my favorite golfer. I don't care.
Yeah,
just because I love him that he goes out there and he goes, there's really only 15 guys that could beat me out here. It's
I was in the front row when he gave that algorithm.
Yeah.
That was at the PGA in 2019 at Bethpage when he deduced that these fields really are about a dozen guys.
I love that. And Listen,
He's
he's
right.
right. He's right. I think Scheffler's a great storyline. I love that he won 2, that he's got 2 under his belt. I think maybe he can fall into, the Colin Morikawa bucket where maybe he doesn't win for a little while, and then we see him emerge
Yeah.
only because only because of the injury, and maybe not this year, but I think
He's
JT.
better than Colin. He's better than Colin at virtually everything. Colin's a wonderful player. Colin is a very average putter to slightly below average. And Scheffler, even though statistically the last 2
Did I say
years,
Scheffler? I meant Shoffley.
oh, Shoffley
I'm
is a
so
little
sorry.
bit
I meant
okay.
Shoffley. Sorry.
Okay, gotcha.
I almost
Okay.
put it. Yeah, Scheffler is different bucket. He's a different world. Shoffley, I was thinking defending champion. He's not in form as much.
No, that is totally fair. I will say this: when he is right, I think that Xander is not only because he won the 2. It's interesting, and look, it doesn't mean that you may not be right that there is more of a Morikawa kind of element to him. He's got more pop in the bat. He's a better putter, and I also think mentally, like
I agree.
Xander Schauffele is a very, very chippy. His headspace is really impressive.
I want to retract that a little because, when you do look at his stats and you look at him at majors, prior to winning last year, he's finishing
his
second.
Major record's excellent.
It's excellent. He's finishing top 10 at all these. So
guy's great in every major.
Yeah, I take that back. But when I think about some of the guys, I think JT wins another major. He's tied with his best buddy Jordan for 3 majors now, which I think he's always thinking about. It's a Ryder Cup year, so he wants to be in form. He wants to be on the team. He's playing great golf, wins a signature event with that big putt. He's back in form a little bit, so I think he's a cool storyline.
And he won at Quail Hollow in 2017.
Oh wow, I did not know that. What event was that?
His first major was at Quail Hollow in 2017.
Oh wow, okay. And then Rory had won at Quail Hollow. What is it?
Rory's won 4 times there in the regular tour event that they have there every year, but they had the PGA for the first time in 2017, and JT won
Got it.
So this is Rory's happiest haunt. He's never won anywhere, more than he's won at Quail Hollow. JT is, I think that he is what he needs to show, and it's not so much that it's a referendum in the PGA in a week and a half's time. He needs to show more consistency in all the majors. For whatever reason, his major record, like you mentioned, Schauffele, those 2 guys have the same number of major championship victories. Xander has legitimately contended in so many more than JT had. He has got to show the ability to figure out all these major championship venues.
Yeah. And what's cool about him, he's kind of, he's a firecracker. Like he's exactly what he is, as you see. He could be the best player on any day, but like you said, the consistency isn't always there. And I love Jordan Spieth is one of my favorite too. I think he dealt with that injury last year, which kind of has hindered him in his abilities.
The last couple of years, it's really bothered him. I'm like you, Corey. Jordan is a very fascinating study. And I've devoted a lot of time. I've devoted a lot of days walking with him, charting his rounds, particularly in the year of 2019 when he was historically going in a very, very weird, strange kind of descending direction to try to understand what was going on, because players who had achieved as much as he had at such a young age, they did not hit this ebb to the degree that he did. He is so important to kind of the overall health of the PGA Tour because he's captive. Yeah. He captivates people. He has the ability for people to go, well, hold on, let me see him hit this shot. Doesn't mean because he hits it further than anybody. means because he's going to emote. He's got body language. He talks out loud. He's a cat on a hot tin roof. He's fascinating to watch.
I love him for those reasons too. And yeah, I hope he could find the winner's circle again in a major form. But the last thing I would just say is, I was never a big WWF, WWE fan, but like the pitch that I've been making to the PGA, nobody's listening. You're probably the closest person that could, hear me, that it would mean anything. But, the big thing with wrestling, right, is like you have the heels and then you have the people. I don't know what the opposite of the heel is, but
you're asking the wrong guy.
You have the heels and the heroes, and a heel is like the villain, right? And then you have the heroes. So, if they can make a Ryder Cup experience of Live versus, PGA, you're having the must-watch TV. And I think the thing that they're doing to us as an audience is the fact that, we want the best product. At the end of the day, at the RBC or Truist or the CJ Open this past weekend, we want Brooks and Bryson and even Phil in the mix at some of these at the end of the round. And I think we're getting gypped because I don't watch any Live, unfortunately. It's not something that's on TV that's readily available to me. So I think that figuring that out is crucial. And I think once they do, because the game of golf is just growing so much, once they do and they can really harness that entertainment aspect, I think it could be huge for the game.
No, the PGA Tour and professional golf, I've never not believe that it is anything other than what it is. It's a niche sport. It's a very affluent lane to be in with respect to your advertising, your sponsorship, the demographics of the audience. It's a narrow lane, but it's a very loyal narrow lane. It's not accidental that the first sport that went 24/7 wasn't the NFL, was golf in 1995 with Golf Channel.
Wow.
They were also the first sport to not only go 24/7, to have a morning show, which I was lucky enough to be one of the original hosts on in 2011, before the NFL, NBA, Major League Baseball, NHL. They're a very dedicated, passionate, loyal fan base, but the sport cannot sustain itself if it does not have all of its human assets competing together on a more regular basis. And you mentioned some of those people, and it's not just the top of the food chain with Bryson and Rahm and Koepka. It's also that next level. It's guys like Tyrrell Hatton and Joaquin Niemann, who's a great young player. These guys are among, whether you want to say, well, he wouldn't be top 15, he'd be top 20. The point is, the top 50 in the world, I would say that 10 of them, 12 of them
exist on Live.
Maybe 15 of them, they're on Live.
Yeah. I mean, there's a controversial argument to be made that Scotty's winning all these tournaments last year with a watered down field. I mean, that is a complex argument to make, but there's also an argument to be made that Joaquin Niemann is playing the best golf in the world right now, and nobody's watching
that argument to me is weightless, because when he does play in a major, he's yet to finish in the top 20. I can't listen to Joaquin Niemann winning 54-hole events as being, one of the three best players in the world. Playing one of the 5 to 7 last groups on a Sunday in a major, not first off on a Sunday.
I'm totally.
Phil needs to go away with that line.
I'm totally with you there, but I think that it's fair to say to what I think you were leaning into, which was a Tyrrell Hatton. These tier 2 guys could win any day of the week on the PGA Tour, just as much as JJ Spawn can win.
No doubt. And we can, again, we can go through these rosters of these teams. And I'm not saying that Patrick Reed is somebody who's going to win 3 times every year, but Patrick Reed.
I mean, look at the Masters the last 2 years.
Patrick Reed is a world-class player.
Still, yeah.
And that's where, like the CJ Cup, and yes, you notice it when Rahm and Bryson are not at the Truist Championship. But I'll tell you what you also notice. You notice that next level of guy that left, and I know some of these guys were a little bit older or whatever. The point is, guys like Thomas Peters, Sergio Garcia,
Yeah,
Sergio still got tread on his tires.
totally.
These guys are viable. They are among the top 40 to 60, and some of them obviously much, much closer to the top 10 in the world. The product is not, the sport is not big enough to be fractured. And I saw this going way, way back, and I'm not a racing fan, but open wheel racing was fractured with kart in IndyCar, and it never really recovered. It's like, wait a second, half these drivers are not running in this race. And we're going back
Yeah.
some time now.
But
They've got to figure it out to find entry points. And look, I'm with you. If Live and the PGA Tour decided one of the fall events is going to be Live versus the PGA Tour,
I mean, the golf world would literally explode. It would explode, and the product would be amazing. Just quickly, Gary, is it blasphemous to say that Scotty's, because there's a lot of comparisons going on. Scotty's, year last year was one of the best since 2000 Tiger, but we're also dealing with a fractured PGA where, to your point, 12, 15 of the top 50 players who aren't in these fields. Brooks Koepka, who is one of the best golfers in the world, is not playing against Scotty each week,
But Brooks Koepka also has the most modest PGA Tour resume of a 5-time major champion. He's such an outlier. I do not entertain this idea that he wouldn't have won all these tournaments. Look, the fields would be better. The chances of him getting picked off maybe by somebody would have been greater, but it wasn't just that he won them all. It was also his scoring average. It was all of the advanced metrics that were so historically great that I have a hard time just sitting here going, you know what, he would have only won 4 times. We don't know that. It's a very nuanced conversation. And I just know that I want the best to see each other more often than 4 weeks out of the year.
Yeah. I don't want to come across as anti-Scotty, because honestly, he's probably my favorite player, beyond, and also just for how he handles himself. He's a family man. He gets to the stand and he goes, golf doesn't define me. The best golfer in the world literally says, golf doesn't define me. How special is that? And he's a faith-filled guy. So I'm attracted to him in a ton of ways.
Sure.
But I think it's an interesting exercise to explore. And, again, to my wider point, the game could be even greater than it is right now. And I'm excited for them to figure it out. And
here's one last thing I would say about him his year. Those Live guys, many of them had shots at him in majors, and very few of them finished higher than him in any. I know he only won the Masters last year. He was incarcerated on a Friday morning in Louisville and still managed to beat all of the Live guys except for Bryson. It's like they do get shots at him on the biggest stages, and they don't seem to ever beat him there. The guy is...
Well, the only argument I would make to that is, prior to the fracture, you look at, and maybe Scotty wasn't fully into form, but Cam Smith wins the Open. Scotty was in the mix kind of there. Rory was in the mix there. Who else won?
Scotty Scheffler had not won a tournament until after the Ryder Cup of 2021. Now, he beat John Rahm in singles on that Sunday, and then the next year is when he started winning in 2022. That was his first year of being a winner on the PGA Tour, and then obviously was very, very good, won the Masters, and beyond that, he's been, look, it does coincide with the departure of some top players. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah. And I I think it's fun to do this exercise just because
Of
it's
course.
because it's fun to talk about. But I like I said, I'm very excited for them to figure it out. And my plea to the PGA and whoever's behind this to do it, because it's not serving us and the best product you could possibly have.
We're not, Corey. And the other thing is that, you think about the best players in the world right now. And look, Scotty Scheffler's not even 30 years of age, but Rory is just turned 36 and Koepka just turned 35 the day before Rory turned 36. And you're going, you know,
What's the shelf
these
life? Yeah.
these windows of greatness, for the most part, and whether you want to confine it to their major championship windows, only a few have really long windows, and those were kind of like, obviously Jack extended his by 6 years, but his was still from 62 to 80, and then he added the Masters in 86. Tiger extended his by 11 years by winning the Masters in 19. You look at most great players,
Maybe
their
maybe
greatness is
Watson.
5 to 7 years.
Watson kind of extended a little, right?
Well, not his last major was 1983. It was 75 to 83.
Didn't he win?
Hogan was 46 to 53. These are 5 to 7 years. I mean, Arnold Palmer 58 to 64. They do not stay open that long.
Yeah. No, I guess maybe I'm misremembering. Didn't Watson go to a playoff, or he had a chance at the Open?
2009, he was 59 years
59,
old.
yeah.
That would have been the most out. I mean, that he would have gone from 75 to 83 to 75 to 2009.
That would have been a great trivia. Who ended up
the verge of being.
Who won? Was it Els? Sink. Yeah. His only major. I'm with you. I think, the only counterpoint there is, I think bodies are changing and I think longevity could be longer. And honestly, for some of these guys, like a Rory, like a Brooks, they only need one more major. If they get two, I mean, they're now eclipsing, a Faldo, Trevino, and Mickelson, and they're in their own stratosphere now. So,
well, I mean, 7. Sam Snead has 7, and Palmer has 7. That you're starting to talk about, really in the pantheon.
Yeah.
There's no doubt. The counterpoint I would make to that, and again, this is why these conversations are fun, is you're right. I think that first of all, prime is coming earlier for these guys. Most great players we felt like prime 30 years ago was when you were almost 30 to almost 40. Right. Now it's like 25 to 35. And the way that the guys prepare themselves, there's so much about optimization and launch angle and can the bodies hold up and speed. And the way that these guys play the game now is different from the artistry and the shot shaping and the way guys did it before. And then the other part is this, and this is human nature. When you already have $250 million in the bank, are you really, and you got growing kids, I don't know.
You're not as hungry.
If you're going to be at 40 as hungry to do it.
You have to be built different. I think Brooks has that. I do think Rory has that. But it is something to note about maybe Spieth. And I've thought about this a little bit. He seems like a family guy now, and I love that for him. And maybe that edge changed and family dynamics. I don't know. I don't want to, speak for too many things.
I will say this about Jordan. Jordan is, I've had conversations with his dad because this goes back to my getting down a rabbit hole with him, trying to understand him a little bit more. He is they're all hyper competitive. Will stay out on a blacktop and insist on you playing another game of horse until he beats you. I think that he, like Nicholas, Jack had 5 kids. And when it was time to go play golf, he would go play golf and no one would be more focused. Yeah. And when it was time to come home and be at every softball and volleyball and baseball game, he was at all of them.
That's a beautiful thing.
And I think that's the way that Spieth's going to be.
I love that. Good. And, listen, who am I to say about any of that? But no, it's certainly fun. And I'm glad to flex this muscle with you a little bit because I love the game. And I've always been I've always been a huge sports fan. I've had a huge aptitude for it and language for it. So I could talk any sports. But when I started to find golf in 2020 and then really started to learn about the game more and more, I needed to know about the history. One of my safety blankets, when they talk about watching a show or movie, one of my safety blankets that I'll put on YouTube and have in the background in my life is the Rocco Tiger uh, um, 18-hole playoff. I'll put that on in the background just because it's just so epic. And I love Rocco and that story. So learning about the history and learning about the players is so fun for me. And yeah, I'm excited about the game. This has been such a great conversation. I might, maybe the longest episode we've had. I might make it a two-parter to talk a little bit about the sobriety piece and then obviously some of the more golf fun stuff. But this is such a pleasure. Thank you for joining today. And if you're in the Northeast again soon, you got to come. We could play and hang out sometime.
Well, Corey, I would love to, and I'll tell you, I not only appreciate the conversation, I appreciate what you're doing, and that is in order to keep it, giving it away, and that is telling your story, and I think that's why you are inclined to do what you're doing. And to me, when I feel like the time is right, and it's more right than it's not for me to share my own experience and strength and hope as it relates to realizing that life can be better, and it is unequivocally better. Living a life of sobriety and meeting people and listening to people. And like I said at the beginning, there's great inspiration when you listen to somebody share their own vulnerabilities, because as bad as anybody may think it is and that it can't get better, I promise if you listen, you'll hear somebody that you'll identify with and go, you know what? That makes me believe I have a chance.
Yeah, I'm with you, and I think that's part of the platform. It's this isn't me telling anybody what to do. This is just it's not even mine. It doesn't even feel like mine. I'm kind of there's no leadership here. It's just exploring this interesting intersection of sobriety and golf and the complements that can be there, bringing community together. And it's not like this. There aren't sober golf leagues or great organizations that bring people together. What we're trying to do is be that central hub, though, of all things sobriety meets golf, the de facto area for that, for events, for community activities. I almost think about us akin to, the Golfer's Journal meets Random Golf Club, but for this kind of niche community. And I think it's the perfect time for it because, the game of golf has grown and you have, this wellness push towards, the stigma being lifted and people are more open to talking about it. And it's I'm excited about what we're building and I'm again really grateful for your presence on this. So thank you.
I'm flattered that you would reach out. I look forward to you and I doing this again.
Yes. Okay, man. God bless.
Thank you.